Hello and welcome to the People Space podcast. The name is Mbewe and I'm so excited to have you join us once again. Today's episode is particularly special because we will be exploring the relationship between national debt and reliance on fossil fuel. But adding to that, we'll also be exploring the dynamics of gender in Zambia. Now, I deliberately use the word special in my earlier remarks because my guest is somebody whose blend of talent I find unique. She is somebody who has an affinity for interior design. She is an excellent swimmer. She does a lot of reading, but many of you know her as an executive director of one of the leading voices in this country when it comes to issues of gender. And my guest, ladies and gentlemen, is no other than Mbewe Anamela, all the way from the Non-Governmental Gender Organization Coordinating Council, NGOCC. You're welcome to People Space Podcast, and I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really glad to be here.
All right. So, as we get into our conversation, I would like, first of all, to have you help us understand the current debt situation that the country is dealing with. I know right now there's a whole lot of positivity that is going on in the country, and not to take away anything from that, but just give us an overview of the current debt situation.
Okay. Well, the current debt situation, I think, if we look at it, is much improved from when we defaulted in 2020. I mean, the ability of the government to to go and look at the restructuring and to get the results that they did is commendable. However, we still have huge debt repayment to deal with, and whenever a country is grappling with issues of debt repayment, it takes away the financial allocations that should go to very, very important sectors such as social sector spending, which are very, very important for the constituency that I represent, and that is women and girls.
Mm. You've talked about, social sector spending, a very interesting combination of terminology. And from that, debt we know obviously shrinks fiscal space.
It does.
And how has this affected critical social sectors such as, education and health? And we know that when we talk about shrinking fiscal space, we can't ignore the fact that the girl child is the most affected by this.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, because in situations like this, the government is going to focus on fiscal consolidation. I mean, they have no other way to do it but to do that. So what we should be looking at now as a country is getting to allocating to the social sectors such as education and health some of the regionally agreed percentages of the overall budget. That is not happening possibly because a lot of what we're earning now has to go towards the debt servicing. So what happens then is that critical elements of the health sector and perhaps the education sector, water and sanitation sectors that directly affects people's lives tend to suffer because money has to go elsewhere.
Mm. Interesting. And, one of the things that I've always wondered when you talk about conventions that clearly stipulate what is supposed to be apportioned to these critical social sectors, not only Zambia, but the majority of African countries do struggle, yet they are party to these conventions. In your opinion, where do you think the laxity comes in? Where is the big problem? Why do we fail to just adhere to these conventions?
I think the failure is in that the conventions themselves leave a lot of leeway for countries to implement them, maybe incrementally. And some of these maybe are governed by regional economic communities, for instance, such as SADC, and they do not have enforcement power to ensure that countries adhere to to whatever these protocols are supposed to reflect in our budgeting and in everything that we do. But then another issue is that you need to have the political will to do what you promise to do. So it's about the leadership priorities as well. Where are the priorities that we have as a nation? What are the leadership priorities? And that is what guides where we allocate our funding. Uh, Funding allocations are the biggest indicator of priorities.
Let's now turn our attention to one of the other important aspect of our conversation today, which has to do with fossil fuels. How important is it for Zambia to transition? When should it be? When should this transition actually occur?
That transition should have occurred even yesterday, because we are seeing the impacts of some of the fossil fuels. I mean, around climate change right now. I mean, some of the things we're seeing in Zambia now we never experienced years ago. Even just what happened in Lundazi a few weeks ago around the flooding and people losing crops. These are things we did not experience to the extent that we're experiencing them now. So climate change is actually very real, and we know that from all literature and everything we've heard and read. It also has to do with some of the different fuels that we use, and there are different elements that are contributing to climate to climate change. So it's very important that we begin to transition, and to transition very, very quickly. I know that we have now quite a focus on energy, alternative energy, such as what do we call this? Um, solar, yes. We have a focus on alternative energy, and that is good. But I think we needed to have started this a long time ago, not only because of the challenges that we've had with hydro energy, but as a way of being proactive to ensure that we don't get, we're not contributing a lot to the issues of climate degradation, because we know what fossil fuels do. We know what fossil fuel does, even in terms of the production. Sometimes you have spillage, like when it comes to oil, and then there's the issue of coal and some of the impacts. So we need to really look at how we can accelerate this. And there are also other issues, such as health issues, that have to do with fossil fuels, maybe which we'll talk about later. But there is a real need for us to really transition, and part of the transitioning should make life easier for Zambians.
Let's now look at the nexus between debt and fossil fuel. How does high debt directly or indirectly constrain Zambia's ability to finance a transition away from fossil fuels in Zambia and also facilitate investment in sustainable energy?
So for me, the most logical response to that is that when you have high debt payments, as I said, it takes away funding from certain sectors. And I talked about the social sectors. But now, if the money that we're using in terms of our debt repayments is money that could go to investing in alternative energy sources, for example. So that's how high debt impacts. It takes away money that could go into those investments that would enable us to transition quicker. And that in itself, I mean, it really delays the progression towards the transitioning until a time when we free up our funds, from a debt servicing. Then we can look at how much more we can invest in alternative fuels, for example.
Away from the perils of the probable perils of fossil fuel that you highlighted, briefly, just help us understand what the role of fossil fuels in our daily lives. There could be ordinary Zambians out there, that will be watching us and will be wondering, okay, so if I'm in a fossil fuel, if it's chan, like, should
Yeah,
I
what
be
are they?
concerned about this?
Yes. So fossil fuels are issues like the petrol that we use in our cars, the diesel that we use in our cars. And they're fuels that we hear from scientists, come up from deposits of certain things over years, like coal, I think, is a deposit of something that hardens over years. Oil as well is a deposit of something that, it's so there are fuels that we use in our everyday life. There's kerosene that we use in kerosene lamps. There's fuel for our cars. There's coal, and charcoal as well, in its own way, is a fossil fuel, because we know we're taking it out of trees that that we have planted and had to grow over years. So fossil fuels are there in our everyday life, and they matter to us in a way if there's no alternative, because we all use electricity, hydro fuel. Also, we all use electricity. In fact, hydro fuel is not. It's not a fossil fuel, no. But we all use we use fuel to get around in our cars. We use kerosene. We use gas as well for our cooking. That is a good alternative, but it also comes out of a certain process that is, yeah,
Okay. So, in your view, are there elements of a dead fossil fuel trap at play in Zambia currently? And with that, where is the need for revenue to service the debt derives continued reliance on fossil fuel extraction on consumption?
Well, debt in itself is a debt trap because you can't get out of it. You have to pay. And when you have to pay, it means that you need to allocate funding, which you could allocate elsewhere. So that is the trap we're in right now. And that is why debt is usually called a debt trap. And until we get out of this completely, yes, we've made significant strides, but until we get out of this, quite significantly and lose the money, to go into alternative fuels, we will continue to rely on some of the fossil fuels that we have. Now, for instance, to what extent are we able to invest in electric cars in Zambia? Because they answer the issue of dependence on petrol and diesel. To what extent are we able to do that? We've seen a little bit of investment, and when we don't see much talk about the issue of electric motor vehicles, that is one sure way of getting out of fossil fuels. And of course, we now have the solar energy and all that, but then we are still in the process and probably can't do as much as we would like to do. I know that there've been a lot of investments coming from the private sector, which is very good, and it's very good for us to look at alternative ways of financing the alternative fuels. But the debt trap is a debt trap, and until we resolve that, it will always impact on how we spend.
Let's now turn our attention to the issues of gender. And I know that you're one of the leading voices when it comes to advocacy around that key thematic area of socioeconomic development in this country. One of the things, as we discuss the economy, the impact of fossil fuels, as we attain stability at macro level, one of the things, obviously, that has been a guiding factor is the issue of austerity measures.
Yes.
And when we talk about austerity measures, obviously, the prominent one that comes to mind is the issue of cutting off of subsidies. Just bring us into perspective how this affects women and girl children in general, because sometimes it's easy for the educated to be having these debates and conversations with regards austerity measures, subsidies, and in the process lose the ordinary Zambian. So just how does this affect women and children?
So when you reduce subsidies, or if you cannot, if you don't have resources to service subsidies, it means that the cost of certain things remains high or goes up. And let's look at ZESCO electricity right now. There's been an outcry out there around just how expensive electricity has become. That's because the government has no subsidies. They're not subsidizing power anymore. But then how much of our population, especially those that are, let's look at the entrepreneurs that are reliant on the small scale entrepreneurs, that how many of them are reliant on the availability of ZESCO electricity? Most of them remain reliant on that because the alternative power is at times unreachable in terms of costs. So, and when you have a high cost of a very basic, that's one of the inputs. We can call it as an input. The way finance is an input into business, electricity is an input. It is a cost. So if that cost is high, it affects the price of the end product, and therefore affects the price. I mean, affects the buying power as well of those that are, that are, let's take, for example, if you're producing a cup, let's just take a cup. Mm-hmm. And if you use electricity to produce that cup, it means, and the cost of that electricity is high, it means the price of that cup will be high. Yes. So, and the price of something as basic as milling will be high because of the production costs. So, it's it's very how do I put it? This is the issue of subsidies. Sometimes people look at it as spoiling people, spoiling a country.
I think that's the narrative.
No, it's not. Subsidies are important, especially for the vulnerable, whose buying power is very low, who cannot afford certain things. So subsidies are important. And then also, as I said, when you're servicing debt, besides the subsidies, there's issues, for instance, around social protection. Maybe, and social protection targets the most vulnerable. Maybe if we're not servicing debt, we'd be reaching bigger numbers. And definitely, I think we would if government is committed to social protection, as one of the strategies around addressing poverty. So it's very, very pertinent that issues such as subsidies are addressed, but they cannot be addressed as long as we're paying high levels of debt.
Agreed with you. It brings me to a very interesting quotation from the Bible. I can't remember exactly which part, but I think I don't know whether it was Jesus who was telling somebody and said, the poor you always have with you.
Yes.
But of course, the levels of poverty are relative. And do you think that as we implement issues or programs that are meant to alleviate poverty among the vulnerable, the poor in our society, there has to be a deliberate strategy alongside that should also create a graduation process for those that are able to. Because, for example, you don't expect a 95-year-old to graduate into anything. They're 95 years old. They
Yes.
can't work. They just need to be helped.
Mhm.
So there it's clear. There's no debate.
Yes.
There's no argument.
Mhm.
But do you think there's supposed to be a deliberate program running alongside such programs that are meant to address our vulnerable in society?
They definitely should be. Even if the poor will always be with us, you don't want to keep them poor. And this is why we should have comprehensive policies. If we have a social protection program, we know that one of the key challenges that most people face at the moment, especially the vulnerable, is access to finance, and finance even for them for entrepreneurial whatever initiatives they may have. It is access to knowledge. So we could perhaps look at the different strata that we have on our social protection programs. Like you've rightly said, the elderly, we cannot expect them maybe to graduate. But there are people living with disabilities who are there. There are women-led households, maybe they're child-led households. How can we help them? What other programs can we put in place in tandem with the social protection that would help them move maybe from that level of extreme poverty to the next, which is sometimes called vulnerable but viable. There's that term where you're vulnerable but you're viable because you can get a skill that would take you out of that. So we should have comprehensive policies. We shouldn't just be happy that we have a social protection policy that people get dependent, on the state, for lack of a better term, what is handed out every month. It is what is handed out. How can we help these people move from this level to the, and it's looking at other needs, entrepreneurial skills, access to finance, access to markets. And that's how we should look at this, so that we should even monitor how many have moved maybe in a year from this to more vulnerable, to more viable, how many have totally moved out now, because now you're going to focus on those that are still. So I think we need very, very comprehensive policies.
Earlier on, we did talk about shrinking fiscal space and how that affects social sector spending. But I would like us to uh, carry the same idea, but this time around, limit it to how that affects work when it comes to women. So, how does lack of fiscal space, lead to an increase in women's unpaid care work in Zambian households, particularly when public services are degraded?
So the thing is, public services also have to do quite a lot with availability of jobs. And all the analysis that we have seen as NGOCC is that there are more men in informal employment than there are women. So if the jobs
That's informal, formal.
formal
Okay.
employment.
Uh-huh.
So if the job space shrinks further, it means the opportunities for women shrink further. So it's important to understand that any shrinking fiscal space affects different parts of society, including the private sector in a way. So private sector creates jobs, agriculture creates jobs, the public sector creates jobs. And if the fiscal space is shrinking, then the issue of access to jobs becomes more critical. You need the jobs because you need to, for example, if there is not insufficient money going to health, it means that at individual level, you might have to subsidize some of what you'd find in the health sector. Are you going to find your Panadols? Are you going to find your everything that you need? Because we know right now that there are a lot of families that are having to pay for certain things, even at University Teaching Hospital or at Levi Mwanawasa, because those are not there. So if the fiscal space shrinks like that, and people are subsidizing certain things that they should be able to get for free, lack of a better term, like for instance, under NEMA, because we subscribe to NEMA, it's not totally free. However, certain drugs should be available, certain services should be available. I know of a family now that is trying to get an MRI done, and it's so complicated. They should have done it last week. They haven't done it by now, and yet it's a critical element of the treatment of this person. So in subsidizing, it means you need the job, you need sources of income. And when the space is shrinking, everything else shrinks, including the job market. And women who are already disadvantaged are further disadvantaged.
Let's get back to the issue of fossil fuels before we take a break. And over 80% of Zambians rely on traditional fuels like firewood and charcoal for cooking. How does this rising cost of imported fuel, fossil fuels, and electricity tariffs, a consequence of economic volatility linked to debt, intensify energy poverty for women who are typically responsible for fuel collection and cooking?
It does intensify it because, first and foremost, um, if electricity is out of reach, they will look at alternative sources. And sometimes it's kerosene. Kerosene, when you have those kerosene lamps, they create all sorts of health problems because of some of the fumes that come out of it. Cooking with charcoal also creates fumes. Some cannot even afford charcoal. These are, when we're talking about deep in the rural areas, we're talking about women that have to walk long distance to go and get firewood. That exposes them as well to issues around gender-based violence. Some girls get into all sorts of situations, and women there, we've heard of women being raped because they're out there. We've heard of women being bitten by snakes, mauled by animals, and all that, because now the only fuel that they can access maybe is little twigs, which they have to go into the bush to go and look for. And then when it comes to charcoal, it has its own health issues of besides depleting, the environment. So and then it takes away the time that women have to do other productive issues. Even if a woman wants to be in a community, wants to participate, for instance, in a community program, or take up a leadership program in a community, in some community space, but they have to use 60% of their time looking for fuel, that takes away from them. I remember that as NGOCC, there was a time when we went into an agreement with a company that produced these stoves that could be powered by solar. It reduced the time that women were going out there, to look for other alternative sources like twigs and all that. And it freed up their time. Women have got a lot of unpaid labor. A lot of things that women do is unpaid. The caregiving, this looking after, looking for food and all that, that's unpaid labor. While that is happening, the man is out there, maybe working in the mine or working somewhere else and getting paid. But the woman is equally busy, maybe even more busy, because women don't knock off. You know that? Women don't knock off. First, you wake up very early in the morning to make sure there's water. And in the village, that water must be warm. It must be powered by something, which could be firewood. After you've cooked, you have to clean the house. You have to make sure that the children are ready and all that. This guy comes up at 5, comes back at 5. 5, you're still preparing meals, getting children. So women don't knock off. And all that labor is not recognized and it's unpaid. While the person comes in with an income and controls that income that it comes in with, because you haven't earned it. They have earned it. So, there are a lot of dynamics that happen that disadvantage the woman. And when we talk about these issues of gender inequality and equalities, those are the things we look at. It's not just the big things around whether Cecilia or Maureen or anybody is a minister or whether they're heading some institution. It's not just about that. It's even household dynamics. And those are the ones that are most affected by this issue of affordability, the issue of accessibility. Though it's the household dynamics. And these household dynamics play out in the economy as well. If this woman cannot go and open up a salon because she has to, she can't go and sit and plait somebody's hair to earn money because she has to go and look for firewood. She has to go trek miles to look for water. What is that doing to our economic development, the community's economic development, the nation's economic development? You've got somebody who's capable of doing something, but they can't because of the lived realities. And as NGOCC, what we bring to the table are the lived realities of the women and girls that we serve.
Interesting dynamic there. I just love, the different explanation when it comes to gender dynamics and how sometimes we understand them. My guest today on the People Space podcast is no other than the executive director, all the way from NGOCC, and Mbewe Anamela. And of course, we are discussing the issue of national debt, how national debt and fossil fuels are connected, but at the same time, providing a gender lens to it. But we'll take a break and we'll be back shortly on the other side. Stay tuned.
My name is Andrew Kamanga, CEO for Northwestern Energy Corporation. I'm happy to be with you as we discuss energy issues on the people's space. Stay tuned. We have a lot to talk about, from generation, transmission, supply, as well as recently the events around power trading from the power traders. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Baita Maka. Join me on the People Space podcast as we discuss the Tobacco Control Data Initiative.
Welcome back to People Space Podcast. Today we are looking at national debt, fossil fuels, and of course, adding a gender lens to it. And my guest is none other than Mbewe Anamela, all the way from NGOCC. She is providing some perspectives on those crucial aspects of our economy and governance. And of course, one of the things that I would like to remind all of you watching this particular episode is that you can be a lucky winner of some of the important, exciting, and amazing goodies that we offer on this platform, which range from t-shirts, mug cups, capes, you name it. All you have to do is be interactive on the episodes where these, editions broadcast. We are talking YouTube under the handle Center for Trade Policy and Development. We're talking about Facebook, Center for Trade Policy and Development, and of course CTPD Zambia on TikTok, Twitter, which is now X, and of course other social media platforms. So if your comment on those platforms gets enough traction, likes, comments, or could be engagement, you do stand a chance to be that lucky winner. And most importantly, we can also offer you an opportunity to be able to interface directly with some of our guests, such as the one that I'm talking to today, to be able just to learn a lot and get more of what you can. So let's get talking, let's get interactive. Now, before we continue our conversation, I've noticed there's a ribbon on your shirt. And for those that may not know, do you care to explain what that is?
Yes, I'll start by explaining that I'm dressed in black today.
Uh-huh.
Today is a Thursday.
Mhm.
And we've had an ongoing campaign against gender-based violence as NGOCC for the last almost 4 years. And one of the things, one of the elements of that campaign is that every Thursday we dress up in black. And that black is our reminder that there are people, both men and women, that have died to gender-based violence. So we are remembering them. And then the orange ribbon is orange is a very bright color. And if you realize that usually when we have the 16 days of against gender-based violence,
Activism
orange
against
is the
GBV, yeah.
color. So it's the global color.
Mhm.
So this reminds us that while others have gone, we still have GBV going on.
Fight
So
continues.
join us in wearing black on Thursdays and, putting there an orange ribbon just to remind us that we still have a fight to win
This is
against
for only
GBV.
February or the whole year?
We've
Throughout
been
the year?
no, it's throughout there. We've been doing this now for I think the last 3 years.
Okay.
Yes, it's ongoing, and
Okay.
platforms like this help us, to explain and talk about it.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Now, getting into our conversation, obviously, I would like us to pick it up from where we left when it comes to, the emerging energy transition. And on that, I would like to find out, in the renewable, emerging, and clean energy sectors, how are Zambian women typically represented? And, this could be in comparison to men.
Well, I don't have the statistics really,
Mm.
but generally from anecdotal evidence, issues around energy are mostly powered by men, because some of them have to do with engineering, and we know that it is now that Zambia is really trying to focus on ensuring that the girl child is also getting into STEM subjects that will enable them then go into some of these fields. We have been, for example, talking to some of the women in mining and the engineers in mining. They're not very many, and they face serious challenges just as women, because the sector is not ready for them. Even in terms of infrastructure, the sector is not ready for them. And then generally, we also know that there are more men in leadership than there are in women. So when we have these discussions around energy transition, when we have these discussions around affordable energy solutions, are women there at the table to ensure that their lived experiences are included there in policy frameworks, in negotiations, in just ensuring the direction that the country will take? Women usually are missing. So what we would like to see is that structures that are firstly referring to issues of energy transition and looking at the direction and shaping where we're going should include women and their lived experiences. Then we should also look at to what extent can women play a role also in terms of what is available around the business side of, of energy transition. For example, our approach as NGOCC when we look at climate adaptation and working with our women is that we have trained our women to look at this not in terms of only what they can use as alternative energies, like for instance, these energy efficient cook stoves, but how can they use this as a business? We have also linked our women to certain companies that sell these alternative energies as middle people who can sell those for them. So when we train them to make a cook stove, we then say, go out into other communities that do not have this skill, make these stoves and charge for them. So for us, we look at this as an opportunity. It's a challenge, yes, but it's also an opportunity. We want women to be present where there are contracts, where there is training around how we transition as a country. Women must be present there.
Interesting. And, still on the issues of transition, what are the main structural barriers that prevent women from fully participating in and benefiting from a just transition, especially to clean energy?
As I said, they're not there at the table
Mhm.
to bring in their lived experiences. And then this is an area which is dominated by men. We would like to see women trained also around. We'd like to see somebody on the roof there, a female setting up solar systems and all that. So I think when it comes to training, first, even we as NGOCC would like to encourage women to get interested in some of these spaces, go for trainings when they can, and then also think of how they can get into business around this as we are trying to encourage them in the areas where we work.
You know, I've got a experience, okay, and I think this is where the structural barriers question is coming from so much, because there's a lady that I took my car to. Okay, there's a gentleman who services my car, if I'm being honest. So on this particular day, I speak to him on the phone. He tells me, you can come. I go and guess the person who welcomes me. It's a woman. So I'm looking at this young lady. I'm like, okay, where is this guy? He said, oh, sir, this guy says I should start the job and he'll find me. I was like, no, 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 no. He didn't tell me that.
Uh-huh.
So she was like, no, no, no. But he said, then she was like, anyway, if you're not comfortable, it's okay. So, I mean, I stood my ground. But then again, I started realizing, I'm like, look, I trust that guy to fix my car. If he says this lady can do the job, why not? So I was like, okay, let me give it a try. So I gave the lady. She did the job.
Uh-huh.
She was done.
She was
So I
done.
asked her, are you done? She was like, "Listen, are you done? As in, are you done?"
So you did not even believe that she
No,
could give you
you
a
see?
good service
No.
because
and
she was a lady, and that's a
because she was a
male.
woman.
Yeah.
And that is wrong. And you see where I'm going with this? It's because at the end of it all, I mean, I I sent the guy the money because she said, no, you can send him the money, but I'm done. You are free to go. If there's anything, please give him a call. I went, there was no problem, there was nothing. But I've come to, having this conversation, I've realized that, sometimes apart from when we look at some of these challenges, I think it has to do with also the mindset that we as men have been tuned or accustomed to. If I want my roof to be fixed, even if there's a qualified woman, I would deny her the opportunity because by virtue of her being a woman, I'll judge that she cannot do a good job, even if she's qualified for the job. So the issue of mindset, is NGOCC also considering or tackling that area just to make sure that whilst we're looking at all these dynamics, the mindset also?
Yes, indeed. In our strategic plan, 2023 to 2027, our first strategic objective is norm shifting norms, shifting beliefs, attitudes, just like the one that you have described now. So we work with communities to sensitize them and to just try and change their mindsets. We work with the gatekeepers, the community leaders, including traditional leaders, to change their mindsets. And one of these mindsets is just that a woman cannot lead. So we get to talk to them about how women and men were made equal. Both have brains. The women are capable as well. The very basics, and that is the focus that we have when we look at the norm shifting. It's about debunking some of those things that we learned and relearning, like, for example, that for a girl, girls don't need to play. All they need is to come home, work. No, every child needs play. Play develops the mind.
Mhm.
It develops the mind. And we used to say boys are brighter. Boys were brighter because they were allowed to go and go out there and explore. Well, make a wire car and what. And all the girl was taught was, you must kukushima. After that, you sit quietly. They're not using their minds to explore. So these are the changes that we need to it's not an easy thing because change takes time. Change takes time. And even just the belief that once a girl is of age, she's only good for marriage. And that's why we have these early marriages. So we need to, it's something that is very important. And I'm glad that you brought this example because these male dominated fields, people feel that women cannot do them. But it's only because women were not given the opportunity in those days. It was unheard for a father to pay for a child to go and do engineering. It was unheard for a father to go and pay for a child, especially things like mechanics, even driving. It was the male. Now we've seen women driving trucks.
Even big trucks.
Yes, I understand some of these mines are doing very well around that.
Yeah.
And and then we're proving that girls are just as capable, women are just as capable. Now that we have worked very hard, even around sensitizing communities around the importance of the girl-child education, emphasizing that the girl child must be given the same time to study, what are you seeing about the results that are coming out, for example, at grade 12, or is it going to be Form 5 level now? Have you seen the result?
The girls are doing well.
That is years and years of investing in sensitizing. And now that the girls are being given opportunities, now we know that they can do well.
Capable.
Yes, they're capable. And these structural barriers, when we've spoken to some of the women, the engineers and these technical people in the mines, you'll be surprised that even the majombos, the boots and whatever work suits that they have, they are created in they're tailored in such a way that they fit men. You would have with these work
So there's
boots.
no size for women.
You have size 11, size 12, size, and they complain, but what about us,
Yeah.
So
like we also work in this space.
Yes. So, and I mean,
Interesting.
there are horrific things that happen sometimes, even just
Okay.
around finding women in these spaces.
Interesting. So how effectively does Zambia's current gender policy or climate change action plan address the intersections of debt, fossil fuels, gender inequality, and what are some of the key gaps that remain?
So I think some of the key things that remain there are ensuring that women also access some of the resources that are coming out of these agreements that are made. For example, there are certain agreements that would I want to use very simple terms. There are certain agreements that if you are living in an area, I think there's something happening, I don't know if that's in Chonga or Rufunsa, where if you manage your forestries in certain ways, the community will get something. So to what extent are women also benefiting from those carbon credits and all those agreements that we have? So we need to ensure that the policies, the legal frameworks, are very, very inclusive, and that sometimes we should know that as a country, we still need affirmative action. Why we need affirmative action, where there's a favorable the favorable opportunities given to women, is that because we haven't yet reached gender equity and equality. So for as long as we don't reach that, we'll still need affirmative action. So for example, you could say very clearly in a document, when there are these carbon credits, when there's anything that is coming in around energy earnings or anything, make sure that 50% of the recipients are women. Those types of policies are
Okay.
what we need.
So I know that we touched on this a little bit, but just to add on or single out, beyond macro level policy, what are 2 to 3 concrete grassroots level interventions that you feel could be implemented to empower women in Zambia's energy transition?
Some of them would be around ensuring that affordable and accessible alternative energy is available. For example, we're talking about the type of cooking stoves, and we should be talking about solar. To what extent is that accessible and affordable? It's just making sure that whatever alternative sources are there are available to women, accessible and affordable.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
As we get to wrap up our conversation today, unfortunately, what role can CSOs and women advocacy groups in Zambia play in demanding accountability for debt management and pushing for a gender just energy future? There's so much talk about the future of Zambia's energy sector, the money and everything, the opportunities. But yeah.
So it's very important that we have a gender just energy future. And this is because women form more than 50% of the population in this country. Therefore, we should ensure that every citizen, including that over 50%, benefit, and that the issues that challenge them are addressed to ensure that there's equitable access, equitable benefit for everybody as we transition. And this is why our policy frameworks as CSOs, what we look at is we look at holding government to account around policy frameworks, legal frameworks, not only in terms of looking at the gaps, but also looking at implementation. So that is our role as civil society. Another role that we have is sensitizing communities. We need to sensitize communities of exactly what is a just energy transition. What does it mean? What should they expect? And also train them to demand, for their expectations and to demand for their rights. It's a human right for everybody to participate in the economic, social, cultural development of the country. And that includes benefiting around the energy transition.
Thank you very much for coming through on the People Space podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. My guest on the People Space podcast has been Mbewe Anamela, all the way from the Non-Governmental Gender Organization Coordinating Council. And of course, we have been delving and discussing into national debt, fossil fuel reliance, and also adding some icing on the cake by providing perspectives regarding the gender dynamics in Zambia. And of course, I want to remind everybody else before we say bye that you can be a beneficiary of some of the goodies that we give out on this platform by simply being interactive and engaging on some of our platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, under the handle the Center for Trade Policy and Development and CTPD Zambia on Twitter, TikTok, and of course, Instagram and other social media platforms where CTPD is currently present and active. If your comment garners enough traction, such as engagement, comments, likes, you might just be the lucky winner of these amazing, fantastic prizes that we are offering. The name is Wenson Mavor. Thank you for watching and see you next time.